Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining me for another day text. Sorry I was not available yesterday, but I have a lot going on, as some of you know. Many things taking place, both with regard to the channel, CW Jaw stuff, and also secular things. So I'll give some updates about those things after the day text. But we're working our way through the letter of James. We review biblical and other texts every weekday morning at 5 a.m. unless otherwise scheduled. Yesterday, for example, I had a lot happen in ways that I intended to do the text, but I was not able to do so, so I just reposted the time. You'll see me do that. If for some reason I don't show up, I'll reset the time. I try to keep it set so that it's reliable and consistent. But there's so much going on right now that it's a little difficult to keep to the schedule. But I'll do my best, and we'll keep going through these texts. So we're in the letter of James, and we're reading chapter 2. We're going to read verses 20 through 24 today of James chapter 2. I'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll make a brief application, and we'll be on our way. Okay. Starting in verse 20, James chapter 2 reads, "But are you willing to recognize, O foolish man, that belief based on good reasons, apart from works, is useless?" Verse 21, "Was not Abraham our father considered righteous as a result of works when he was offering up Isaac, his son, upon the altar?" We're going to talk about this account when we're done with the text. Verse 22, "You see that reasonable belief," that's my translation for the word that's also translated faith, "was joined together with his, Abraham's, actions, and because of the things he did, Abraham's reasonable belief or faith was made manifest or fulfilled." And let's skip the note and we'll jump down to verse 23. We'll come back to that note in a minute. Verse 23, "And so the historical writing, or sacred writing, was fulfilled, which says, Abraham trusted in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And as a result, he was called a friend of God." Verse 24, "You must see that from works a man is shown to be righteous, and not from faith alone." You often hear people today say faith alone, but they never use the word "not," which we see here in the text, because they're trying to prove something that doesn't really have its root in these texts, but that is based more on a belief about what faith is that really isn't defined in according to the examples that we read here or elsewhere in the texts. So, for example, let's talk about Abraham. Let me read my note. If you notice the note to verse 22, let's just go ahead and read it. It's on the translation or references to the word translated reasonable belief. It says, "Abraham listened to Jah's angel's voice." And it gives the reference, Genesis 22, 1 through 2. And so his belief was reasonable, not blind. See, people sometimes think, well, why would Abraham offer up his son Isaac? Who would do that, right? Who would offer up your own child? But they're just ignorant of the account and the historical context in which this was written. This was a time when almost every nation was offering sacrifices to these various gods in ways that would not have been unusual for Abraham at all. He was from the city of Ur in Mesopotamia, which most people didn't even know existed until 150 years ago or so. Yet the Bible described it for thousands of years. So when Abraham was responding to Jah or his angel, according to Genesis 22, that's not an unreasonable response. If he can see that this is a divine manifestation and it is consistent in some way with the way that the people around him were acting to all these other gods, it would not have been unusual for Abraham to then see this as normal in some way. Special, because of course he's being talked to by this being, but it would not have been unusual at all. Abraham knew full and well that this was normal and common in his day, and he responded to Jah who, as I explained in the past, was not actually trying to get him to sacrifice his child. He was simply making sure that Abraham and Isaac had the traits that were necessary to pass on to the Messiah, the body that Jah was preparing, according to Psalms and as quoted in Hebrews, that Jesus would come to the earth and live in, so that he would be ready to deal with these different things in a sinful world, which is much more complicated than the world that Adam was in when he sinned by following Eve versus listening to Jah. So it all fits. And when you look at it and you understand John, the development of humankind and what was actually needed to bring forth a Messiah to do the things Jesus did, including and most important of which was to give his life to the Father when he didn't have to do it. That's Isaac. Isaac did not have to die here. Maybe because he was sinful and in some way it was legitimate in the greater sense. But what I'm saying is, he didn't do anything wrong, and Abraham was just showing loyalty to Jah because of the context in which he lived and the appearance to him. But that's what Jesus had to do, right? Like the way Isaac had to follow Abraham's faith because he was talking to Jah, and in a world in which these things were done, sacrifices. So Isaac demonstrated the faithfulness in a situation very difficult to be loyal in, but because he loved his father and he understood the context of the world that did these sacrifices to other gods, it was not so unusual. So he listened to his father. He didn't rebel against him and say, no, I'm not doing that. And that's exactly what Jesus did, right? Jesus did the thing he probably didn't want to do. I mean, we know especially when he was being tortured, nobody would want that. So it's understandable. He didn't do anything to deserve it. And yet he went through it so that he could prove the devil was a liar in claiming that Jah should not be worshipped all the way to death versus choosing our own way, which brings forth death anyway. If you're going to die, you should die faithful to Jah, right? Because if you don't, what is your hope? Probably none. But if you die faithful to Jah, your hope is secure. He gave you life in the first place. We did not give it to ourselves. So we should remember that. Isaac and Abraham demonstrated the very same things we see Jah and Jesus doing. And this account is very important for that reason. That's why it's in these texts. It's not in these texts to make us think that Jah was a bad God or was consistent with the sacrificial practices of the other nations. He wasn't. He stopped Abraham. He did not ever intend to sacrifice Isaac. He was just trying to make sure, he was making sure that the things necessary for his son's body would be passed on through these two people. Otherwise, he would choose someone else until he chose the right people that showed the right traits that he could then use and develop into the body of his son. But let's get back to even the more critical part of today's text. It was not until Abraham actually offered Isaac, right? He did until he actually trusted in Jah, like 23 said, verse 23, until he went through the process of getting ready to sacrifice Isaac, thinking this is what God wanted, the world does it, okay, now we'll do it because this is God talking to me now, and everybody else does it to these other gods. This is probably what he was thinking on some level. You have to look at it in the time in which these events occurred, not today. That is not the proper way because it's a different time. And so when Abraham actually went through this process, Jack, this is important because remember, we talked about trustworthiness and the crown of life. You don't get the crown of life until you're trustworthy. You show some level of trustworthiness. And that's what Abraham did here. He went through the process of responding to Jah, doing what he said. And when Jah saw that, and when he saw Isaac prepared to give his life, that was what he needed to see in order to continue to use Abraham and Isaac according to the promises that were made. So until that happened, though, This text is very clear. Look at verse 21. Was not Abraham our father considered righteous as a result of works when he was offering up Isaac? See, when it was only when he got to the point of actually offering him up, about to. It wasn't just this mental acceptance that he would do it. That he heard Jah and he's going to respond to him. That was not it. It was only when he actually started to do something that Jah stepped in and said, okay, now I know. Now I know you were willing to do this. But he didn't say that to him when Abraham just accepted it mentally or in his heart. He accepted it when he acted out the faith in his mind and in his heart. That's it. So if you don't act out your faith, it's not enough. It's not faith. It's dead faith. How can you have the crown of life and dead faith? Jack, that's a good question. We need to develop that further, because if you have the crown of life, you can't have dead faith. And you can't have dead faith if you don't have works that show your faith is alive. It's not that the works merit your salvation or you stack up enough works and you earn it. You just have to show you have the right faith. That's it. And the works do that. Right? We sin too, and that shows we need forgiveness, but we do good works, and that shows we have faith. Right? Because if we didn't have faith, we wouldn't do any good works. We'd just go out and sin and pleasure ourselves at everybody else's expense. That's not what we do. Maybe occasionally we fail, we do something wrong, okay? We turn around, we start doing the good things again, and we show faith. So it's really, in my view, very simple in some ways. It gets complicated. People complicate it a lot. But I don't think it's that complicated. I think when you look at these texts in their historical context, you understand what Abraham was going through, what kind of person and societies were around him, and why it was easier for him to go through this process, why Jah would even talk to him about doing such a thing, and then ultimately why Jah needed to see this in these two people. Because we are in a situation where Jah had to respond to the fall of Adam and Eve. So the process of doing so in regard to the promised seed is directly tied to these events. Everything in the Bible ultimately is tied to these events. Everything in the world that has ever been done is tied to these events. And Genesis chapter 3 and all the stuff that we read about happening there and forward, everything is happening because of that. So when we read these accounts and we read about Abraham and Isaac and this mock sacrifice, the people in the world who don't understand this, they're just like I say, dumb, or they're they just choose not to know, whatever. Okay, if they don't want to be called dumb, then you're just not very smart for not looking at it carefully. Take your pick. Either way, don't talk about these accounts and Isaac and Abraham and this stuff unless you know what you're talking about. Don't tell me that you would need to check God's ID if he asked to sacrifice your son when you're talking about it in the context of our time, our modern day, and you have no idea what was going on back here. You didn't even know the city of Ur existed because you didn't bother to check. So, don't even waste your time with idiots like that. I don't care if they're a college professor or whoever. Most of those aren't as qualified as they appear to be anyway. But if they don't have facts or evidence and they're just talking nonsense, mocking your beliefs, and you know the context, you know why these things were done, you know what this is all about, and they don't waste your time. They're not going to figure it out. They don't care. They want to keep reading about all their little philosophies and things that take them nowhere, instead of reading these texts and learning from history and understanding these different gods and societies of ancient times, how they relate to people like Abraham and then the Jews and then our modern times. We can put all of this together and it makes sense because we look at it historically and in context. Not like this just some fairy tale or something. This is stuff we can look to and support with archaeology and history. This is not so far back we can't put it together. or undocumented in terms of geography and peoples, it's not traceable. This is reliable history. These people existed, and we believe all of these things happen in association with Jah. So we act out our faith by doing some of the same things when we're called to. Look at verse 23. It says, Abraham trusted in God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So it's the trusting in God. Was the trust when he heard him and in his heart he said, okay, I'll do it? No. We know that because Jah, if you read the account, Jah went to him after he prepared the altar and got everything ready. It was right before he was about to sacrifice Isaac that Jah said, okay, stop. Now I know that you are prepared to do this and you have these, this. Now I see. Not before. He didn't credit the trust in Abraham's mind or heart after he told him, and he didn't read into it whether Abraham was responding in that internal sense. He waited and he watched, and it was only when Abraham acted out his faith. Look at verse 22, the end of it. Abraham's reasonable belief was made manifest. Only when that happened was it credited as righteousness. So that's why in our text grouping today, verse 24 ends, you must see. This is James talking. I'm just repeating it. A man, you must see that from works a man is shown to be righteous, not from faith alone. Now, this is important too, because it doesn't mean that works alone can prove you righteous. That's why it words the last part of that verse that way. Not faith alone. So faith has to be in it, right? Because it's only the not faith alone. So it doesn't say you don't need faith. That's not what this says. It just says that the works resulting from faith prove you're righteous. And it gives the example of Abraham that we just discussed. So keep this text and this account in mind, and the note that also references the account where you can see the way that Abraham was approached, the way he reacted, and then the point at which Jah recognized that he was trustworthy, that he could receive the crown of life, in the future. It was credited to him in that way. So these are some good texts. They help us to appreciate our position and what our works and faith all add up to, right? We don't want to get too cocky or overconfident because we do a lot of works. That's the opposite. Then we go overboard because then we start looking at ourselves as the ones responsible for our salvation. We start thinking we're better than other people. I don't ever think that way. If in fact, even no matter what I do in these other ways, I'm always thinking about the negative things. I shouldn't do that. But I'm more aware of my mistakes than I think more about all the good things, as if somehow that's making me, the better person. I'm more worried about my mistakes and things I need to correct than my good works, because those are the things I should be doing anyway, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. We shouldn't be given any special credit for it. This is what we're made for. But we can appreciate others. It's not easy. So it's just a little hard work, but that's, doing the right things. You're not, people may applaud you, but you shouldn't be expecting applause. That's just because you do what you're expected to do. That's just the right thing to do. So keep these things in mind. Try not to get overconfident, but do not doubt your works. You need those to show your faith, but they should happen naturally, spontaneously, because of what you believe. And they will. Most works are the result of something you see or feel inside, and then you act out. So try to develop the faith that you need to act these things out in the same way. Our history includes Abraham, Avram of Ur, very special and historically important person. And he worshiped Jah, the same God we worship. Look at all the things that happened when he started to do that, and the promises that were fulfilled through Abraham as a result. So we have a similar future ahead of us. We keep trusting in Jah. We're going to get through this world, And whether we have to wait until the new world comes or live right on through it, we're going. We're on our way, and we're not going to stop. So anybody can come with us if they want and they trust in Jah and try to be a better person. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody is. But you cannot go around blaspheming Jah either and then also try to serve him. He's a worthy God. I can show you all kinds of things from history that tell you about the kind of person he is, just like these accounts do. Remember, he did not have him sacrifice his son. This account does not prove anything like that. It proves just the opposite, that he was willing to take advantage of the kind of mentality that these people had developed at this point in Mesopotamia in association with all these false gods, and utilize that so that his son would be able to show the same quality where it really mattered, when it really counts, not in sacrifice to all these other gods who just want to take advantage of you. Jah does not do that. He made us to live and enjoy life, not to be these low-level slaves that these other gods turn us into. Okay, that's some good information for us, and we have a lot of material in James like this. So I'm trying to group the texts together that give us the best opportunities to focus on these different accounts. And I think the account involving Abraham and Isaac is so powerful in so many ways. But unfortunately, because of the act that Abraham had to go through in this historical context for God's purpose to be fulfilled with Jesus, people today, they look at it in the worst light, and they understand nothing, in total darkness. And so they're blinded by the quote-unquote light that they think is showing them that Jah is a mean God, when the account shows just the opposite and is fully explainable in the context of the seed promised in Genesis all the way to his arrival on earth in Jesus. So we're here to educate people, give them information so they understand Jah better. They know the way he is and the way he's not, and why we worship him. And that's what we're going to keep doing. So what is today? Thursday? All right, we have a text tomorrow. Again, unless something comes up, but it should be, let me see, is today Friday? I might have my days. It is Friday. You see, I get behind sometimes, or I'm so busy. Yesterday was very busy, so I'm a little off on my days. But all right, so tomorrow, Saturday, we've moved our shows, CW Jah Talk, Open Session, to Sunday at 8:30. Tomorrow is still open. You know, I may do some videos, and of course I'm working on another channel, as many of you know. But I'm talking with different people to try to get things that this is very important. It has to be done the right way. And as you know, I'm dealing with a lot of criminals. I've been doing that for 15 years. So that's nothing really new. It's just a new cycle of the criminal activity. But I've also met some other people, non-criminals. I met, through this whole thing and the bad people in Mexico and here. I met good people in Mexico because they wanted to know, hey, are you talking about what's going on? No. I'm talking about these criminals who are hurting me and trying to damage me up here from all these other, secular things. So as a result, actually, it turned out to be a benefit because I was able to connect with other people who got worried. Like some of you got worried, they heard my message, and they know the past with me and some of these criminals and the way they hurt me and my family and all the stuff. So I was able to reconnect with her, and we have some family together. So that's a good thing that came out of this. We'll be able to hopefully develop that relationship further. We'll see what happens with these other criminals, these criminal people. I mean, unfortunately, they got involved with my life again. They didn't have to do that, but that's the way they are. They sought me out and tried to hurt me again. So we're gonna have to do something, as I mentioned before, and you saw the video. So give me a little time to get it all set. We have a lot of things happening. It's a big deal, and I have to follow in the line with the right protocol, so I don't mess up what I'm trying to accomplish, and I'm not as effective in dealing with these people. Very difficult, very unfortunate that I have to go through this all over again. But as I say, I met somebody else, and there's always a silver lining, I find, in most things, and so Either way, I'm going to keep doing the videos. We'll get the new channel going. And then we'll develop these things further. I have a lot of ideas. I have more garbage dumps, all these things. I'll keep working on the videos. And we'll keep promoting the worship of Jah and belief in Jesus and why we should treat others the way we want to be treated. Not try to hurt people for our own selfish gain. So that's our goal, to promote these three things. Leave everything else to everybody else. But when it comes to hurting people, when you get involved in other people's lives, now you see, it makes it a little more difficult because it's hard to treat criminals and bad people in the way you want to be treated, because they need to be punished sometimes for the badness. And then, but it makes it complicated, right? I mean, when the criminal and the bad people get involved in our life, it's harder to be a Christian in the right way because we're trying to help people and they're trying to hurt people. So we get involved in this conflict. It's unfortunate. Either way, we know the way. So never forget it. And praise Jah in Jesus' name.